Hi everyone. Professor White and I have put together a very brief presentation that we'd like you to use as a prelude to Class 3. Spend a few minutes looking at this, jot down any questions you might have, and bring them to class so that we can talk about them in group discussion and help everybody understand the questions you might have. In this presentation, we want to introduce you very quickly to a concept you're going to hear a lot throughout the semester and you're going to be asked to practice frequently, and that's the importance of communication in business. As you go through the slides, we'd like you to keep 3 points in mind. First, great companies and great leaders work very hard to communicate effectively. In fact, you might argue that one of the reasons we consider them great companies or great leaders is that their communications is so effective. Think of the way Apple communicates versus the way Microsoft or Dell communicates, and you can start to see the importance of communication in business. But it doesn't come naturally. It's a result of a lot of research, an understanding of who the audience is, and a lot of practice to get it right. The second point we'd like you to keep in mind is that business communication, and certain forms of business writing in particular, is different than other forms of communication you may have used in the past. And so you're going to have to allow yourself some time to master this skill. It's not going to come instantly, but when you get it, you're going to be a far more effective communicator. The third point is that your success in class is going to depend a lot on your ability to learn and apply communication skills. We're going to devote a lot of class time and bring in outside resources to help you with this. And throughout the semester, there are going to be points where your assignments are tied directly to your ability to communicate. All this is done because communication is so vitally important to the success of business. Why is that? Well, in study after study, we see similar data. When communication is effective, success rates improve. In this case, a study done by the Project Management Institute showed that on major projects that were studied over the course of a year, the success rate improved by more than 20% when good communications was at play. Good communications really means two basic things. People at every level of the company understand what their job is and how it ties to the benefits of the business and the long-term strategic initiatives of the business. And information about that is communicated to them frequently. When that occurs, when you have frequent communication that talks about the impact of a job on the strategy of the company, you get better performance. And this cascades down to the individual level. People who are considered highly effective communicators, people who have mastered communication, are generally regarded as more than 5 times more likely to be high performers than their peers who are not as effective at communication. For you, this means that you'll be a better manager, a better leader, and someone who will get recognized quickly and move through the organization faster if your communication skills are honed and used frequently. Let's take a look at how this impacted one world leader. This is Henry Kissinger. He was the Secretary of State during the Nixon administration and the point person for the United States in the negotiations to end the Vietnam War. And while the Nixon administration might not be seen favorably by history, Kissinger was generally regarded as a tough and brilliant leader, and someone who thought so much of communication that he considered the speeches he made as policy statements, and he took extreme care in developing them. In fact, the people who wrote these for him often reported that they'd go through 20 drafts or more and a whole lot of insults before he'd accept the final speech. One of those people was named Winston Lord. One day he was asked to prepare a major policy paper for Kissinger, and this is how we shared the experience. I went into Henry with a draft of the speech. The next day he called me back into his office and said, "Is this the best you can do?" I said to him, "Henry, I thought so, but I'll try again." A few days later, I went back to his office with another draft. He called me in the next day and said, "Are you sure this is the best you can do?" I said to him, "Well, I really thought so, but I'll try one more time." This went on for 8 drafts. Each time he'd ask me, "Is this the best you can do?" So when I went in there with my 9th draft, and he called me back in his office the next day and asked me the same question, I got really exasperated with him. And I said, "Henry, I've beaten my brains out. This is the 9th draft. I know it's the best I can do. I can't possibly improve one more word." And with that, Kissinger looked at me, and he said in a rather flat voice, "Well, in that case, now I'll read it." When we look at the forms of business communication, we generally divide it into 2 areas. Nonverbal, which can happen in a formal or informal setting, relates to the body language of the speaker, how you gesture, your posture, your facial expressions, the tone of your voice. Some studies show that nonverbal communications makes up about 90% of what we communicate when we're doing a presentation or speaking in an informal setting. Verbal communications takes the form of either written communication or oral communications. Oral communications happens in conversations, presentations we're asked to give, meetings we participate in. Written communications usually occurs through emails, research papers, reports, and memos. And I want to focus for the next couple slides on the importance of communicating in short fashion. This is generally considered the domain of the business memo. As is probably very evident to you, business moves at a fast pace these days, and everyone has limited time and or attention. So when you're asked to do a memo, to do a research, and make a recommendation on an issue, you have to keep in mind that the audience you're developing this for is probably someone who has very little time. So your communication has to be concise, accurate, and to the point. And we're going to talk about how you do that in just a minute. The second thing is, when the information is short and concise, it's received better. Many executives these days are reading material on an iPad or on an iPhone. Imagine trying to read a long 8 to 10 page document with heavy blocks of text on an iPhone or even on an iPad. The visual impact of that is not very appealing to the reader, and it may affect the way in which your communication is received. The content of your communication should demonstrate your understanding of the issue and establish your unique point of view. Many people miss this point. They lay out all the data, but never offer their point of view. Beyond that, they tend to just outline the problem but not make recommendations. When you establish a point of view and offer not just the problem, but ways that the problem might be solved, your communication will be received much more positively and you'll get noticed faster. And these are the kind of things we're going to look for in your written communications this semester. So you need to start practicing it right away. Also keep in mind that not every communication answers every question. So when you submit a written form of communication or give a presentation, be prepared to answer follow-on questions. This is usually a sign of interest from the reader. And finally, you've heard this a million times when people talk to you about social media, but it's true in business communications as well. An electronic memo can be distributed globally with the push of a button, and the written word lasts forever. So choose your language carefully. The most prevalent form of business communication is the business memo, and it may be one of the most effective forms of written communication. Your first individual written brief is a 100-point assignment to write a short, concise business memo. The assignment will be posted for you on Blackboard. During class time, we're going to help you understand the content. How do you research information? How do you use certain filters to derive conclusions from that information? And how do you put that together? In the next slide or two, we're going to show you just a few techniques to help create a better visual impact of your memo. But what you're going to find as you tackle this form of writing is that it's far more challenging to write in a shorter form than some of the forms you're used to. Because you don't have 8, 9, and 10 pages to lay out your position and put together all the supporting facts and charts. You usually have 2 to 3 pages where your points have to be clear, concise, and the supporting data has to be obvious. And that's what we're going to be working with you on as we help you develop your skills for developing a business memo. A business memo can take usually 2 forms. One is electronic. It's 2 short sentences in an email or 2 short paragraphs. You can also take a written form, and usually that runs from about 3 to 7 pages. Once you get beyond 7 pages, it's no longer considered a memo, but another form of communication. A report, an analysis, a case history, or something else. Now we want to show you 2 memos. Look at the one on the left. It's thick, it's heavy blocks of text, and it's not very inviting to the reader when compared to the one on the right, where the information is short, concise, and more inviting. The visual impact of your memo is as important as the content that you communicate. Because if you write memos that are long and heavy, they may not get read, or they may not get read in their entirety. If you write memos that are concise and to the point, there's a much higher likelihood that they'll be read, understood, and acted upon. So let's take a look at a couple of the techniques that people often miss that are at work here in the memo on the right. The first is that the writer got to the point immediately. In this class, we call this getting the bottom line on top, or blot. And it's extremely important because if the reader only has time to look at the very first section of this document, they will know right away what the points are that you're trying to make. And if they're good points, it will compel the reader to keep reading further, even if their time is limited. And this is the reverse of the way you've probably been taught to write. In traditional writing, we lay out all of our points for page after page after page, and at the end of the document, we state our conclusion. It's just the opposite in writing a business memo, and it's very important that you understand that. Get to the point right away. The second thing the writer did here was keep their paragraph short. This enables the reader to go back and scan through it later on and find just the exact data points they're looking for, rather than having to sort through blocks of data to get to a reference point. The third thing is the use of subheads to break up text. In this case, the writer chose the word background, which is not a very effective subhead. Think of your subheads as mileposts along a highway. Each one should lead you into what happens next. So a slightly longer description in the subhead here would have been more effective. But the fact that the writer used the subheads to break up the text makes it a much more inviting document to look at. So we've talked about the importance of communication in business. We've talked about why that should matter to you individually. We've talked about the importance of short forms of communication. And we've talked about a couple of techniques to improve the visual appeal of your document. So let's summarize with just a couple of key points. One, communication requires hard work, but the impact of good communication is significant. Two, mastering business communication can enhance your effectiveness as an employee, as a manager, as a leader, and as a company. And finally, business memos are the most prevalent form of written communication. They need to be short, informative, and visually appealing to be effective. That's all we wanted to share with you in this presentation. Bring your questions to class and we'll see you then.